Have you ever wondered how games can create entire worlds through their music? It's a really important part of the gameplay experience, and as this is something that you'll be learning all about at MetStudios, it's worth exploring an old title that is particularly well known for its soundtrack, and one of my favourite games of all time, the original Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is a Japanese RPG. Originally released in 1997 for the PlayStation 1, the game is set in a futuristic world where science, magic, and people with outrageous haircuts mix together. It's often considered by many people to be one of the best games ever made. It's currently in the spotlight again, as recently this game's received a long-awaited remake in the form of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but I'm going to focus on the original game and in particular its soundtrack. Part of the reason for the original game's enduring popularity is tied to its soundtrack by Japanese composer Nobuo Uematsu, as it's possibly one of the most revered soundtracks in video gaming history. It's worth exploring its implementation to see if we can identify what's made it stand out for so long, and to see if it's still relevant in modern games. In a nutshell, its plot could be compared to something like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter, in the sense that it's basically about a group of friends, colourful characters and misfit weirdos who must embark on a globe-trotting quest to defeat an evil villain and save the world, taking the characters to a variety of locations across an entire planet / Middle-earth / Wizarding World / Galaxy. It was the developer Square's first transition to 3D, with all the previous Final Fantasy games utilising 2D sprite-based graphics. 7's graphics were actually considered quite advanced at the time, particularly because it featured pre-rendered CGI cutscenes that, although quite quaint looking by today's standards, were pretty mind-blowing at the time. However, due to the comparative size of the game, and perhaps because of some technical hangovers from the 2D sprite era, 7 still had some limitations compared to other PlayStation 1 titles of the same time. The game had no voice acting or recorded dialogue whatsoever. All the story and dialogue was delivered exclusively through text boxes. On top of that, during general gameplay, the character models were these very simplistic, polygonal cartoon figures that were essentially 3D versions of 2D sprite character designs. This meant that their expressions were limited to simple gestures and animations such as waving their arms around, shaking their heads, jumping up and down, and so on. And what this all adds up to is the fact that the music needs to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of helping to tell the story and to help the player understand a particular character's emotions or nature, to communicate the sense or feeling of particular locations, and overall contributing to the world building and the tone of the game. Let's now have a look at some of the ways the soundtrack achieves that. The soundtrack consists of many individual pieces of music utilising an eclectic mix of multiple genres across it. Each main character has their own specific musical theme, which is heard for the first time upon meeting them and then subsequently at key moments in their character arcs. These pieces serve to augment the personality of each character, and they help the player to understand what kind of person they are, as well as form an emotional connection with them. As an experiment, I'll display images of some of the characters, along with their personality traits, whilst playing a few seconds of each of their themes. In most cases, it should be fairly obvious which themes match to which character just based on this information alone. The choice of instruments and musical style of each piece works to reinforce and fit each character's key traits and thematic place in the story by using these different kinds of moods and styles in the soundtrack. Having specific themes for each individual character in the soundtrack in this way isn't as common in current game development, but perhaps because of the simplicity of the music's goal here, which is to sum up a character in musical form quickly and effectively, could be one factor to explain why these characters and songs still resonate with people today. This application of music extends to the environments and locations across the game world, with most locations also having a unique theme to denote their qualities. For example, the difference between a beach hotel resort, a modern industrial factory, on a ship in the ocean, or grasslands and fields. Each of these locations has a distinct musical identity that helps communicate to the player if it's a safe place or a dangerous one, and other tonal and cultural qualities about it. To gel all of these pieces together and create a sense of artistic cohesion, instead of a random hodgepodge of songs in very different genres, Nobuo Uematsu reused certain notes and musical phrases with slight twists on them in each track, but in different keys or altering the scale used, for example. This is just a small set of examples, but hopefully you can see how Final Fantasy VII's implementation of music could quickly lodge itself into a gamer's brain and create lasting associations. As to whether this is relevant in the modern era, this use of music became less necessary due to the improvements in technology such as full body motion and performance capture, and higher visual fidelity to tell stories and communicate effectively to the player. Nowadays, Final Fantasy VII's type of soundtrack would likely intrude on the experience and actually break the atmosphere more than help it. As a result, video game soundtracks and AAA titles tend to have one or two key themes or distinct songs, but mostly consist of ambient sound design or less intrusive background music that is less at the forefront of the experience. Unless of course it's Doom Eternal. But in summary, maybe it's clear to see why this old school way of scoring a game has fallen out of favour. It's a little cartoonish or on the nose by today's standards, and it wouldn't really fit the tone of a lot of titles. But I would argue that less AAA games are remembered in the same way for their soundtracks, because they don't often work as pieces of music outside of the function that they perform in game. Final Fantasy VII's use of music may then still be relevant in the worlds of mobile games or indie titles that don't have the resources or technology of AAA development. But for developers at any level, perhaps it's worth bearing in mind that this soundtrack is still performed by orchestras, covered extensively and enjoyed by fans around the world to this day, with a lasting and passionate community that continues to surround it.